Hi everybody, my name is Anne O'Connor and I am the Employability Advisor here in the UL Career Service. So today I'm going to talk about competency-based interviews. They are still the most popular type of interview that is on the market at the moment. And particularly if you are going to be applying to the third level sector, it is more than likely going to be a competency-based interview based on the competency framework of the job that you're applying to. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about, first of all, I suppose, how to prepare in advance for an interview. We're going to talk about the power of first impressions. What is a competency-based interview? How to answer competency-based interview questions. So first of all, I want to start, well, what are the three questions does every employer want answered in the interview process? And the first that they're looking at is, can you do the job? Normally, this can be ascertained before somebody even attends for an interview. They're able to tell from your CV, your application form, do you have the necessary skills required to be able to do this job? And when you're sitting at the table at interview, they know that you have the ability to do the job. There's two questions they really want to ascertain at the interview, and that is, will you do the job? So if you've applied and you've gone to the bother of putting in your application form, and if you've gone to the bother of preparing and attending for the interview, that is showing your motivation. But they'll test this further in the interview process. And really important, they want to know, will you fit in? So do you have the necessary behaviors and attributes that they are looking for to fill that particular role? So does this particular role require strong leadership, exceptional teamwork, somebody who has fantastic communication skills, negotiation skills, and will those skills blend with the rest of the team that is currently there? Okay. So just bear that in mind when you're preparing for the interview, and when you're trying to prepare a list of questions, and maybe when you're preparing the question of how to introduce yourself at the interview. So you really need to know, what are they looking for this role in particular. So next I'm going to speak about before you go to interview. So it is really, really important that for competency-based interviews in particular, is you start with the job description. Go back to the job description, put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and really try to find out what they're looking for. If you're applying for an academic position within the university sector, they have very lengthy job descriptions that are worked off a competency-based framework. So it will be explicit in the job description what exactly they are looking for. And within that job description, they'll also have it broken down into the desired criteria and the essential criteria. So in order for you to be called for interview, you need to hit the essential criteria. Therefore, it's really important that you highlight those essential criteria in your application form. They are going, if they have a lot of applicants for the particular role, they're going to filter that down and include people who only have the essential criteria plus the desired criteria. So again, you need to ensure that that's highlighted in your application. But when you get called for interview, they are going to base their interview questions off that particular job spec. They will have other competencies that they will highlight it, as in maybe they really want the candidates to have for the particular role, so they will choose to focus on those for the interview. Within the academic setting, the interviews aren't going to be longer than 45 minutes. There could be 4 to 5 people on the panel, so they're going to be a maximum of 2 questions per candidate or per interviewer on the interview board. If it is in industry, it can be slightly different. You may not have such a detailed job description, but they will be linking it back to a particular competency framework within the organization. The interview could take longer, and you really need to go through that job description, do your investigation about the role and the company and who's going to be interviewing you in order to be able to prepare a list of questions. So if I was you, I would take that job description out, I would highlight all of the competencies they're looking for, and then I would start preparing my questions based off of that. Another essential part of the preparation process before the interview is doing your research on the company or the university or the department within the university that you're hoping to apply to. From my experience of being an interviewer, this is one area candidates seem to overlook when coming for an interview. They get very worked up about preparing for competency-based interviews and getting their stars correct, and they seem to bypass this particular question. And if they are asked it, which they more than likely will be, they have a very, I would say, shallow understanding of what exactly the department does or what exactly they're applying to and why they want to apply for it in particular. And sometimes it may be that they've just skimmed the website. If you really want to show your enthusiasm and your passion for that particular role and show that you are the right candidate for it, your preparation needs to go above and beyond for this particular part of the interview. So I have listed some areas there that you may decide to go and prepare. So how long was the service department company been established? What size of the unit department within the company? What kinds of service products do they provide? Who are the directors, decision makers? How successful is the unit department company? Is there any major achievements? And research the sector, so the trends, best practice, innovations and changes. So bear in mind, this is probably an area you are going to get asked about in particular because you are coming out as a PhD, you have relevant research in the area. You should really be at, I suppose, the top of your game around the innovation and best practices in that particular area. Another tip for this section is if you're going into private industry and you're preparing for interview, go into the investor relations section of the website. Now, you don't need to read through the annual report from cover to end and know it in detail, but it is a really good way to find out, well, what is the company's strategy, overarching strategy? What is the plan for the next 12 months, 5 years? If you look at their quarterly reports, you'll be able to see what they've achieved, what has happened in the market. So it's a really good way of understanding where the company is and how they're going about getting it there. I would simply do a SWOT analysis on the particular organization. So what are the strengths and weaknesses, what are the opportunities and threats for that particular organization. Once I've done that and I've got a really good knowledge of the company, I'd also use LinkedIn, see if you can get the name of the interviewers, who's going to be on the panel, look them up on LinkedIn, get an understanding of their career trajectory, maybe their specialization, their interests. It's all very good knowledge to have before you go into the interview. I would prepare a list for interviews, or a list of questions that they may possibly ask, and that's going to come from the job description and your sort of really good research. Really important is you plan your logistics and your outfit. It's really important that you're there in plenty of time on the day. You know how to get there. You've taken into consideration any roadworks, possible diversions, whatever it may be. Parking is really important. And then I'd go about practicing. So here in the career service, we do offer the service of mock interviews. You may want to record yourself and listen back to your answers for some of the questions, particularly if it's going to be done virtually on a platform like MS Teams or Zoom or Skype. You may want to practice that particular mode, ensure that your technology is working and that your audio and your camera are working as well. So there's a lot to do before you even start looking at the competency-based interview questions. I also want to touch base with you, I suppose, the power of first impressions. So in the interview process, a lot of the candidates and a lot of the people I work with put a big emphasis on getting their competency-based questions organized, using the correct model to answer the questions, coming up with lists of possible questions. But I suppose to bring it all back to basics and start with the power of the first impression, there's some really interesting and probably some stark research out there around how people make decisions, particularly when it comes to the interview process. And of 2,000 managers who have been recently surveyed, they came back with, they formed a first impression of a candidate within 7 to 17 seconds of meeting somebody. And like, wow, that's a really, I suppose, tiny period of time. And if you think back to the interview setting, like what have you done within 7 to 17 seconds of meeting somebody? You have probably stood up and maybe held your hand out to shake the person's hand. So it's really important that, look, we don't overly, I suppose, focus on it, but we are mindful of our presence, of how we stand, how we dress, how we present ourselves, how we shake the interviewer's hand, how we introduce ourselves to the other board members, how we sit down at the interview before we ever get started. From this particular research as well, it has highlighted that managers know, 33% of managers claim that they know they're going to hire somebody within 90 seconds of the interview starting. Okay, so like that again, bring yourself back to, well, what have you done within 90 seconds of the interview? You've more than likely sat down, introduced yourself to everybody in the board, maybe taken a sip of water and are waiting for the first question. Okay, so it's really important that we're mindful of all of the non-verbals and those signals that we are giving out in those first early minutes of the interview. It's often stated it's not what you say, it's how you say, and that definitely is the case at the beginning of the interview. Absolutely, as the interview begins to settle and the interviewers get to know you, they will, I suppose, focus less on your presentation, on your tone, on your dictation, on how you stand and your facial express or sit and your facial expressions, and they will begin to focus on what you're saying. But there's a lot going on in advance of that. So try to optimize that as much as possible. So be mindful of your tone, try to be relaxed, use open hand gestures, smile, be engaging. So if it is that you have to practice your handshake in advance of the interview, do that. Bring it back to those basics. Practice your introduction. Practice sitting down and smiling and coming across relaxed. Okay, so these are a few things you may have not thought about before when you're in your interview preparation. And finally, the most common non-verbal mistake interview candidates make is failure to make eye contact. So it's really important that we don't become overly focused on what we're going to say for the next question, or we don't allow the stress hormones to take over. Try to be as comfortable as possible and make appropriate eye contact where possible. For those of you who are going to be interviewing in the university sector, where it's probably going to be a panel interview, this is really important that you try to engage with all of the panel as the interview progresses and make appropriate eye contact, bearing in mind that the person who is asking you the question is the key person at that particular time. Before I move on from this particular topic, there's two videos on YouTube, TED Talks, that I would like you to watch. The first one is Amy Cuddy, and it's all about power posing and I suppose how we stand and the changes to our stance can have on certain stressful situations like interviews. So it's well worth a watch. And also David Phillips, who talks about, I suppose, what's happening in the chemical reaction, particularly around storytelling. And all I would say about an interview, it's a conversation with a purpose. And those people who do it particularly well normally are very good at telling stories. And this is really important when you're looking at competency-based interviews, and the particular technique I'm going to give you is all about telling your story, but telling your story in a very structured way, that it comes across as being engaging to the interviewer, and it doesn't, I suppose, become unwieldy and go on for too long. So, competency-based interviews. Well, I'm going to start maybe with why are competency-based interviews so popular now. Before, and probably some of us still have experienced this, is called the traditional interview. So where you go in and the interviewer looks through your CV and asks you some questions about your past experience. They may ask you a competency-based question. They may ask you some situational questions. They may ask you some strengths-based questions. There's no real structure to the interview. It's more of a conversation. And that used to be the norm. But then maybe with the development, well, definitely with the development of employment law and protection, people said, well, okay, we need to measure this in a very standardized way. So we need to know what are we looking for in the candidate, and then we need to know what type of questions are we going to ask that to explore that in the interview process. And also it needs to be fair and consistent. So every candidate is asked the same set of questions, and therefore they're able to be, I suppose, marked off each other in a very fair and consistent way. So that's where competency-based interviewing came from. So when you're designing your job description, you need to really look at the role and say, well, what does the person need to be able to do this role and do this role well? And then in your interview process, you explore that further. So you're exploring the behaviors and attitudes around that particular competency. And that's where competency-based interview came from. It's also sort of, I suppose, past behavior as a predictor of future behavior. So you're looking for real life scenarios of where somebody has demonstrated that competency before in the past, and they're more than likely to replicate that in the future if they're in a similar circumstance. They often come with the questions like this. So describe a situation where you had to show leadership, make a difficult decision, work as a member of a team, show initiative, work with a difficult colleague, team member, change your plans at last minute, overcome a difficult obstacle, refuse to compromise, and work with others to solve problems. So each of these questions is testing a different competencies, which is required for the particular role you're hopefully going to be successful at and in the future. So I have a particular model that I really encourage candidates to use in a competency-based interview. And the reason is, first of all, interviewers are normally trained, or they're so used to this particular model that they nearly expect all answers to come back in this structure. It gives you a structure because in an interview you are going to be nervous, you are going to be stressed, and to stop you from wandering and your answers becoming, I suppose, very long and maybe unwieldy, this will allow you to sort of structure them in a nice, consistent way, and allows you to tell the story in a really not a nice way as well. One thing I'm going to say before I move off from competency-based interview is, I suppose, the don'ts, and the don'ts is a lot of people sometimes go into hypotheticals. So if I was in a scenario, a difficult scenario, a difficult situation, this is how I would deal with it. Okay, they're looking for a specific example when you did deal with it. So don't go down that route. And if you can't find an example, just say you can't find an example. Don't go into the hypothetical. Also, sometimes people don't take ownership for their involvement in the particular competency. So they speak like in we did and we did this. No, you need to take it from I did this and this is my responsibility. So that's two things to bear in mind. When you are looking at that job description, and you're coming up with the different scenarios that highlight the competency. So whether it be communication, teamwork, problem solving, whatever the job description has listed. Once you have those scenarios, and I'd normally try to pick between 2 and 3 for each competency. Then I would scaffold that with the STAR technique, okay? So the first 2 parts of the STAR technique are called the situation and the task. Now, this is very much describing what the situation was. What was the specific task you were faced with? So the when, the where, the with whom. So in a painting, it's the background. It's essential information, but it's not selling by any means. And you need to have it there, but don't overly go into this in too much detail. A lot of the time in interviews, I find candidates give me too much information in the situation and the task, and they start to brush over the action and the results, where it should actually be the flip. So where I want a lot of the detail and a lot of the information is the A and the R. So the action, how? What action did you take, okay, in that difficult situation? What results did you achieve? Conclusion did you reach? So this is where you really go into the detail and embellish this, well, not embellish, but you expand the story as much as possible. And then are the reflections. So it's really important, that ability to, that I would say, growth mindset, that ability to learn from situations, reflect on it, and even better when you're in a similar situation, what did you do different given your previous experience? That's an A1 answer. That shows that you have the ability to reflect and move on and grow in a scenario, because not all stars that you're going to be describing are going to be positive. Some of them may not be positive, but it's the fantastic learnings you've taken from those particular situations that you want to highlight, okay? So it is what it is, okay? As in, once you follow this model and you have the ability to build your story around it, that's what the interviewer is looking to hear. And normally when I'm interviewing, I will have STAR written beside the question, and I will jot down notes beside each of the letters. So the situation, the task, the action, and the results. So when I am scoring my interviews and I'm comparing candidates against each other, I'm really looking at that STAR, and I'm really looking at, okay, the action and the result, and did they demonstrate that, and how strong was that particular example, and how well articulated was it? Within a competency-based interviews, some interviewers will go back and look for clarification, or they will go back and they'll probe a little bit deeper. So, Anne, can you tell me a little bit more about that particular situation? And they will ask you to go into a little bit more detail on it. So be prepared for that. What has happened me in the past as well is that I've been in an interview situation and I was expected to be probed. So when I gave my answer, I gave it light enough so that they could go back and ask me for some more detail, but they didn't. Okay, so it took me 2 questions in to realize that they weren't going to probe me any further. So my answers needed to be a lot more comprehensive and a lot more detail in them, because I wasn't getting the opportunity to explore that further. So be aware of that. You're going to have to judge it on the day what way the interviewers are going to go. So these are some sample competency questions: working under pressure, teamwork, initiative, customer service, communication, problem solving. There is a competency framework for the University of Limerick, and there's also a competency interview handbook as well that's got a list of all of the different competencies and the associated questions that the interview panel may use in an interview situation. So if you do have an interview coming up pretty soon within the academic setting or even outside of the academic setting, I would look that particular booklet up on the UL website, and I would review it. It'll just give you a flavour of the different types of competency-based questions you could be asked. If you are an interview, like I said previously, and you are asked a question and you haven't thought about the scenario and you don't have a scenario prepared, don't panic. Take a moment, maybe take a drink of water, ask for a moment to think about it, take a deep breath and think, well, oh, where have I experienced this? If you genuinely can't come up with one, don't make it up. Just say, sorry, I can't at the moment think of an example for that one. Do you mind if we come back to it at a later stage? Okay. Um, so these are just little hints and little tips while you're in the interview to give yourself time. Also, it's really important is if you have prepared, and this happens quite a lot as well, you prepared a particular scenario that you think is really, really strong and you really want to use it in the interview, but it doesn't fit any of the competencies that they ask you in the interview, and you try to shoehorn it in to a particular question, it just doesn't work, and it's very obvious that you're doing that. So please try and avoid doing that. Also, and you're going to kill me now because I've said your preparation is so important and, you know, knowing your list of questions, but really try to come across as natural as possible. Don't come across as being over rehearsed. So the difference between over rehearsed and natural is like if you're asked a question and you have prepared an answer, deliver it in a really natural go and a very confident and competent delivery. Not and try not to make it, I suppose, that really stilted, over rehearsed answer. I know I'm asking a lot of you in this interview preparation, but you yourselves I assume, can tell the difference as well between somebody who's coming across as really natural or somebody who's over prepared. Okay, and that goes back to those two videos I was just talking about earlier and the power of first impressions, because interviews at the end of the day are you trying to connect with the interview panel and demonstrate how well you can do the job in a very natural way. At the end of the day, you just want to gain their trust that if they give you the job, that you will do it very well and to the best of your ability. So I suppose just to recap there, I've gone through a lot of information, but advanced preparation is key. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and understand exactly what they're looking for. Speak to people within the department, within the organization, try and find out who those interviewers are. Do a comprehensive company and job research. Really important that you know what they're looking for, and maybe the stuff they're looking for that's not written in the job description either. And then I suppose the power of first impressions. Bear that in mind, and that's for any scenario, for your first day at work, for when you're making a presentation. Bear that in mind. And finally, the STAR technique, applying that to your answers for the